5 Golden Age actors Marilyn Monroe secretly dated, you'll be surprised. Forget everything Hollywood ever taught you about Marilyn Monroe. Forget the diamonds, the smiles, the fantasy. Because when the lights went out, the most desired woman on earth often cried herself to sleep. In the final pages of her life, Marilyn didn't leave behind love letters. She left behind a list. 5 men. 5 untouchable legends of Hollywood's golden age. Men the world worshipped, but who, behind closed doors, left her feeling invisible, humiliated, and emotionally shattered. This isn't gossip. This isn't rumor. It's Marilyn's truth, raw, private, and devastating. Tonight, we open the diary Hollywood never wanted you to read. And the first name on the list is a man you think you know. A heartthrob whose kiss she didn't call passion, but pure disgust. Stay with us, because once you hear her side of the story, you'll never see these legends the same way again. Tony Curtis, the man in the mirror. The world remembers the summer of 1958 as sunshine and laughter. Cameras rolling, crew smiling. A comedy so perfect it would be etched into film history forever. But Marilyn Monroe remembered something else. Behind the bright colors of Some Like It Hot, behind the applause and champagne, there was a hotel room where the laughter stopped cold. A room where Marilyn, exhausted, fragile, and quietly unraveling, looked for comfort in the arms of the man standing beside her on the call sheet. Tony Curtis. To the world, he was the golden boy. Handsome. Effortlessly charming. The kind of man studios built careers around. To Marilyn, at first, he seemed like safety. Someone familiar, someone warm in a world that was becoming unbearable. But when the door closed, the illusion shattered. Marilyn would later write that Tony Curtis never truly saw her. Not the woman trembling beneath the weight of expectation. Not the soul begging to be held without being performed for. What he saw, what he always saw, was himself. Intimacy with Tony wasn't shared. It was staged. His touch was careful to the point of cruelty. Precise. Sterile. As if closeness itself were a contamination risk. He treated desire like choreography, never allowing it to become messy, human, or real. There was no surrender. No vulnerability. Just control. And then there were his eyes. Marilyn noticed it early on. How, even in their most private moments, his gaze drifted past her. Toward the mirror. Toward his reflection. Toward the image he was maintaining. He wasn't lost in her body or her presence. He was watching himself play the role of a lover. She was there, but only as a prop. A beautiful accessory required for the scene. The deeper wound wasn't the physical coldness. It was the quiet punishment beneath it. Tony Curtis couldn't stand that when they entered a room, every head turned toward Marilyn. That her light eclipsed his. That no amount of polish could make him the center of gravity when she was near. So in the one place where she needed warmth most, he withheld it. His now infamous comment, comparing kissing Marilyn Monroe to kissing Hitler, wasn't a joke. It was an act of public humiliation. A man bruised by jealousy lashing out to regain control of the narrative. And for decades, the world believed him. They called Marilyn difficult, unstable, impossible. But in her private truth, she revealed something far more unsettling. Tony Curtis wasn't cruel because she was hard to love. He was cruel because he loved himself too much to love anyone else. He polished the outside until it gleamed. Inside, there was nothing to hold on to. Marilyn learned her first devastating lesson early. You can lie next to someone and still be completely alone. And as hollow as Tony Curtis made her feel, as cold as his indifference was, there was something almost merciful about it. Because he was predictable. He was a chill, not a storm. The next man on her list would not merely ignore her soul. He would bruise her body, exhaust her spirit, and drag her into chaos she was never prepared to survive. If Tony Curtis was the mirror, the man who comes next was the mess behind it. Marlon Brando, the beautiful animal. If Tony Curtis taught Marilyn Monroe what emotional emptiness felt like, Marlon Brando taught her something far worse. Disillusionment. By the mid-1950s, Brando wasn't just a movie star, he was a revolution. Brooding. Dangerous. Untamed. The man who broke Hollywood's rules and rewrote masculinity itself. To Marilyn, he looked like truth. She had spent her life surrounded by men who performed charm, who rehearsed desire, who loved appearances more than people. Brando promised the opposite. Depth instead of polish. Instinct instead of vanity. A soul as raw and damaged as her own. She believed he might finally see her. What she found instead was rot. When Marilyn stepped into Brando's private world, it wasn't bohemian or romantic. It was neglect disguised as authenticity. The air in his apartment hung heavy with stale smoke, spoiled food, and the sour presence of a man who wore his filth like a manifesto. Brando believed cleanliness was a lie society told weak men. He believed manners diluted truth. He believed restraint killed art. And Marilyn paid the price for every one of those beliefs. Intimacy with Brando wasn't tender, it was invasive. Not a meeting of two people, but a collision where only one person mattered. There was no courtship, no patience, no attempt to understand what she needed. He didn't enter the moment with her, he descended on it. Heavy, urgent, consuming. As if her body were a tool to drain his frustrations, a place to dump his anger, his hunger, his exhaustion with the world. Marilyn would later describe feeling less like a woman and more like an object beneath him. A surface-absorbing impact. A stress valve for a man wrestling his own demons and refusing to clean up the mess they made. If Curtis had been too careful, Brando was terrifyingly careless. His hands didn't ask. His presence didn't listen. His passion didn't care if she was there at all. And the cruelty didn't stop at the physical. What broke Marilyn most was the lie. She had believed Brando's silence meant depth. That his brooding hid insight. That his refusal to explain himself was the mark of a tortured genius. Instead, she discovered emptiness, often just laziness, indifference, or a hangover masquerading as profundity. His famous method wasn't spiritual discipline. It was an excuse. An excuse to be rude. An excuse to be selfish. An excuse to avoid responsibility for his space, his behavior, and the women who shared his bed. He called it being real. Marilyn called it degrading. With Brando, she learned another brutal truth. Wildness is not intimacy. Intensity is not love. There is nothing romantic about being consumed by someone who refuses to see you as human. When she left him, she didn't feel heartbreak. She felt contamination. A need to scrub her skin, to wash away the sense that she had been used rather than touched. That her longing for connection had led her not upward, but down into dirt. And yet, there was one mercy Brando offered, even if unintentionally. He never pretended to be anything else. He was chaos in plain sight. The next man on Marilyn's list would be far more dangerous, because he hid his cruelty behind immaculate suits, perfect manners, and absolute power. Brando bruised her body and exhausted her soul. But the man who comes next would teach her what it feels like to be owned. Frank Sinatra, the man who owned the room. If Marlon Brando was chaos you could smell the moment you walked in, Frank Sinatra was something far colder. Power. By the early 1960s, Sinatra wasn't just a star, he was an institution. A man whose voice filled rooms and whose presence silenced them. He didn't chase attention. It bent toward him automatically. When Marilyn entered his world, she didn't step into romance. She stepped into territory. Lake Tahoe. The Cal Neva Lodge. Pine trees outside, velvet darkness inside. A place where Hollywood smiles shook hands with men who never smiled at all. And at the center of it, Sinatra. Immaculate. Untouchable. In control. To the public, he was elegance. The gentleman crooner. To Marilyn, he was something else entirely. Intimacy with Frank Sinatra was never mutual. It was transactional. He approached closeness the way he approached business, with authority and precision. Everything happened on his schedule, by his rules, and for his satisfaction. There was no spontaneity, no softness, no room for her emotions to exist unless they served his. If Brando treated her like a tool, Sinatra treated her like property. Marilyn would later write that his touch felt less like desire and more like inspection. As if he were confirming ownership rather than expressing want. He didn't reach for her, he directed her. Where to move. when to stop, when to be quiet. The voice that sang about love lost all warmth behind closed doors. There was no tenderness afterward, no lingering connection, no reassurance that she mattered once the moment ended. When he was done, he turned away. Sometimes he stood up immediately, adjusting his jacket, returning to his card tables and his powerful friends, leaving her alone. Cold sheets, cold silence. And then came the realization that shattered something in her permanently. At the Cal Neva, Marilyn wasn't just Frank's companion. She was currency. She sensed it first in the glances, in the jokes that landed a beat too long, in the way she was presented, displayed, admired, not as a woman, but as a possession, a shining symbol of access, a gift that elevated his status among men who measured power in domination. She began to understand that in Sinatra's world, love wasn't something you gave. It was something you controlled. The most devastating part wasn't fear, it was erasure. Frank Sinatra didn't hate Marilyn. He simply didn't see her as fully human. She was an accessory to his legend, a trophy that confirmed his reach, a beautiful object that existed to reflect his greatness back to him. And Marilyn, who had spent her entire life starving for safety, realized too late that power does not protect, it consumes. Sinatra's cruelty wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It lived in the certainty that he could take what he wanted and walk away untouched, in the knowledge that his reputation would always shield him, while hers would absorb the damage. With him, Marilyn learned another unbearable lesson. Indifference from a powerful man cuts deeper than violence from a reckless one. Brando had been a storm, destructive but honest. Sinatra was ice, smooth, silent, and lethal. Yet even this wasn't the deepest wound. Because the next man on her list didn't dominate her body or trade her for status. He did something far more intimate. He dismantled her mind. Laurence Olivier, the man who made her feel small. If Frank Sinatra stripped Marilyn Monroe of her humanity through power, Laurence Olivier did something far more insidious. He convinced her she never had any to begin with. London, 1957. Gray skies, wet streets, polite smiles sharpened into judgment. Marilyn arrived carrying hope like a fragile offering. The Prince and the Showgirl wasn't just another film. It was her chance at redemption. A chance to prove she was more than the blonde fantasy Hollywood sold. A chance to stand beside the greatest actor of his generation and finally be taken seriously. Sir Laurence Olivier was royalty. Not just famous, revered. Marilyn admired him desperately. She came ready to learn, to grow, to be seen. In her mind, intimacy with Olivier wasn't about desire alone, it was about validation. If he believed in her, maybe she could believe in herself. But Olivier never came down from the throne. In private, he didn't become warmer. He became colder. Intimacy with Olivier felt less like connection and more like examination. He approached closeness the way he approached Shakespeare, with discipline, precision, and absolute emotional restraint. Every movement was correct. Every touch perfectly timed. Every gesture technically flawless. And completely empty. Marilyn felt it immediately. The absence of heat. The absence of surrender. He wasn't with her, he was performing at her. Playing the role of a lover with expert control, never allowing himself to feel what he was simulating. For Marilyn, who lived entirely in her nerves and emotions, this was agony. But the physical distance was only the surface wound. The real damage came from his eyes. Olivier looked at her not with desire, but with polite condescension. With the faint, almost amused pity of a man indulging someone beneath him. As if her emotions were excessive. As if her vulnerability were embarrassing. As if her hunger for meaning were a childish inconvenience. Even in their most intimate moments, she felt judged, measured, found lacking. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult her outright. He didn't need to. His silence carried verdicts. Marilyn had spent her life fighting the dumb blonde lie, reading Freud, Dostoevsky, anything that proved she had a mind worth respecting. Olivier dismantled that fragile confidence without lifting a finger. With a raised eyebrow. With a pause that lingered too long. with the quiet assumption that intelligence and depth were things she borrowed, not possessed. He made her feel loud, clumsy, unsophisticated, worst of all, stupid. And there is a unique cruelty in being diminished by someone you admire. In bed, he treated her body as charming, even delightful, but her thoughts as irrelevant. He validated her deepest fear, that no matter how hard she tried, she would never belong in the world she longed for. That she was merely a showgirl who should be grateful for proximity to greatness. This wasn't passion. It was erasure through superiority. When Marilyn left London, she didn't feel anger. She felt shame. A quiet, corrosive shame that followed her back to Hollywood and whispered that her emotions were flaws, not gifts. That her sensitivity was weakness. That she was too much, and somehow never enough. Olivier never shouted. Never threatened. Never touched her with cruelty. And yet he wounded her more deeply than most. Because emotional abuse doesn't always leave bruises. Sometimes it leaves silence. Sometimes it leaves doubt. By the time Marilyn crossed the Atlantic again, for men had taken something essential from her. Her trust, her body, her safety, her confidence. And still, she believed in one final illusion. The last man on her list wasn't someone she feared or resented. He was the man she hoped would save her. Clark Gable, the man she needed, not the man she found. By the time Marilyn Monroe reached the final name on her list, she was no longer searching for passion. She was searching for shelter. Nevada, 1960. The desert stretched endlessly, sunburned and unforgiving. The film was The Misfits, a title that felt less like fiction and more like prophecy. And standing opposite her was the man who had lived in her imagination since childhood, Clark Gable. To the world, he was the king of Hollywood. To Marilyn, he was something far more personal. A father she never had. As a girl shuffled through foster homes, Marilyn carried his photograph like a talisman. She told people he was her real father, a fantasy that gave her comfort when nothing else did. Steady, untouchable, the man who would protect her when the world turned cruel. Now, decades later, fate placed her beside him. She believed this was finally it, that in his arms she would feel safe. But when the bedroom door closed, Marilyn didn't find a king. She found a ghost. Clark Gable was 60 years old, his body eroded by decades of cigarettes, alcohol, and the impossible burden of being a legend who refused to age. The strength she had imagined was gone. In its place was exhaustion, frailty, a man quietly losing a war with his own mortality. Marilyn wrote about the smell first. Not desire, not cologne. The scent of sickness, of stale bourbon and tobacco, of a body shutting down piece by piece. It clung to him, unavoidable and terrifying. The illusion collapsed instantly. Intimacy with Gable wasn't uncomfortable because it lacked passion. It was devastating because it reversed everything she needed. She didn't lean into him. He leaned into her. His hands, once symbols of masculine power, trembled uncontrollably. Early Parkinson's. Withdrawal. He would fall asleep mid-conversation, not from peace, but from pure depletion. Marilyn, the woman the world worshipped, found herself holding him upright, soothing coughing fits, wiping sweat from his skin. She wasn't a lover. She was a nurse. And something inside her broke. For the first time, she wasn't being ignored, dominated, or diminished. She was being needed, but in the most unbearable way. Not as a woman to be cherished, but as a support beam for a man collapsing under the weight of his own legend. She felt pity. And pity kills desire faster than cruelty ever could. In Clark Gable, Marilyn saw the final truth she had spent her life avoiding. There was no savior coming. The father figure she had invented didn't exist. The mountain she believed she could lean on was already crumbling. And worse, she realized she had been trying to build safety by attaching herself to men who were already breaking. The silence in their room wasn't intimacy. It was vigil. The tragedy didn't end there. Determined to prove he was still the king, Gable insisted on performing his own stunts in the brutal desert heat. He pushed himself beyond reason, for pride, for image, for the fear of being seen as weak. Days after filming wrapped, he suffered a massive heart attack. He died shortly after. Marilyn was shattered. She didn't just grieve him. She blamed herself. She believed the stress she caused, the delays, the emotional weight she placed on him had accelerated his death. That her lifelong hunger for a father had finally crushed the man she loved most. Clark Gable wasn't cruel. He wasn't selfish. He wasn't manipulative. He was something far more tragic. He represented the death of hope. From him, Marilyn learned the most painful lesson of all. Even heroes bleed. Even legends decay. And searching for salvation in another human being only leads to loss. She lay beside him wanting to feel protected. Instead, she felt the ticking clock of mortality. And when Clark Gable died, something inside Marilyn died with him. Not love. Belief. By the time she closed her red leather diary for the last time, 5 men had taken everything she had left to give. The narcissist, the beast, the boss, the elitist, and finally, the father who never came. Marilyn Monroe was surrounded by the greatest men of her era. Yet she died feeling completely unseen. And that is the quietest tragedy of all. In the end, Marilyn Monroe wasn't destroyed by one man. She was eroded. 5 men. 5 legends. Each worshipped by the world. Each failing her in a different way. One loved only his reflection. One confused chaos for depth. One mistook power for intimacy. One used intellect as a blade. And one, the man she needed most, arrived already broken. Together, they formed a prison with no visible bars. Marilyn didn't die surrounded by enemies. She died surrounded by gods, men so protected by fame that no one questioned what they took from her behind closed doors. The tragedy isn't that she loved them. The tragedy is that she kept believing one of them would save her. She searched for safety in vanity, for passion in filth, for protection in power, for validation in brilliance, for a father in a dying king. And each time, she paid with a piece of herself. Hollywood told her she had everything: beauty, fame, desire, immortality. But no one taught her how to be held. In her final hours, Marilyn didn't leave behind scandals or gossip. She left behind truth. A warning. That admiration is not love. That power does not protect. That genius does not guarantee kindness. And that legends can be the loneliest people in the room. She wasn't asking to be worshipped. She was asking to be seen. If this story stayed with you, if you felt the weight of being desired but not valued, if you've ever been surrounded by people yet felt completely alone, then this isn't just Marilyn's story. It's a reminder to choose connection over control, to choose warmth over image, to choose kindness over legend. Because history remembers the gods of Hollywood, but it almost forgot the woman who survived them. Call to action. If you believe Marilyn Monroe deserves to be remembered as more than a fantasy, like this video. If you think truth matters more than reputation, share this story. And if you want us to continue opening the pages history tried to seal, including the chapters that follow her diary into the world of power and politics, subscribe now. Because the story doesn't end here. It was only the beginning.